Hi guys, how you doing today? Um, so yesterday, um, I had you. Uh, uh, we talked a little bit about hydrocarbons and what they are, and in my lesson video, we said that hydrocarbons are molecules that contain hydrogen and carbon. Okay. When we very first started talking about carbons or carbon chemistry, we talked about elemental carbon. A lot of you got this wrong on the little question I posted yesterday when I asked you what are the types of hydrocarbons. These are not hydrocarbons. Graphite, diamond, and Buckminster fullerene are not hydrocarbons because hydrocarbons have hydrogen atoms in it. And remember, we talked about elemental carbon. Elemental carbon just has um, carbon atoms bonded to carbon atoms. Okay? So I commented on those, but it's very important. You would have known that if you watched my lesson video. And that's why it's so important to watch these videos. These videos are like me standing up in front of the classroom doing a lesson. If you don't watch them, you're not going to get the content. All right, so please make sure you watch these videos when I post them. I post them for a reason, and that is to teach you whatever content I need to teach you. That's the way you're going to be learning in this distance learning, and of course, uh, reading some pages in the text as well. All right. So we are now talking about hydrocarbons, and yesterday's question was, what are some hydrocarbons that we find in the earth that we use for energy? And the correct answers were the fossil fuels of coal, petroleum, which petroleum is another word for oil, and natural gas. Okay, and those are made from hydrocarbons. Those are hydrocarbons. So you were right when some of you put alkynes, alkanes, alkenes. Those are hydrocarbons, and they are some of the hydrocarbons that are from the earth. What I was more gearing towards was the general name of the fossil fuels. So fossil fuels are hydrocarbons. They're made from hydrogen and carbon. All right. They are, and fossil fuels as we know it, and we're going to talk more about fossil fuels at a later time, but the hydrocarbons we are going to talk about today is how are these hydrocarbons, more about the structure of the hydrocarbons as molecules, okay? So we talked about why carbon is so a main character in this unit. And we talked about how it has 4 valence electrons and wants to form 4 more covalent bonds. Okay. We're specifically today going to talk about those fossil fuels, but what do we call them on a molecular level when they are combining with hydrogen, hydrocarbons? We base it on how they're structured. Okay, so the first type of hydrocarbons we're going to talk about are the simplest type of hydrocarbons, and they're called alkanes or saturated hydrocarbons. And we're going to talk about what we mean by saturated. We talked about saturated when I took the sponging class and I saturated with water. That means it's filled up with water. When something is saturated, it means it's filled up. When we talk about saturated hydrocarbons, what do we mean saturated with what? Well, saturated with the most amount of hydrogen atoms that the molecule can hold. Okay? So I am going to hop out of this PowerPoint right now. Okay? Let me see if there's anything. Okay, yep. I'm going to hop out of this PowerPoint right now. And I am going to go to use this Jamboard. Okay, and we're going to talk about, there are 3 types. We're going to talk specifically about hydrocarbons. The first type of hydrocarbon we're going to talk about is called alkanes. Alkanes. Okay, so what do we know about alkanes? Remember, when we're talking about hydrocarbons, yes, fossil fuels are made from hydrocarbons, but when we talk about them in reference to alkanes, alkenes, alkynes that some of you have picked out, we're really talking about how the structure of the hydrocarbon molecule is. So let's talk about alkanes. Alkanes are saturated hydrocarbons. Saturated. Okay, and saturated means it has the most amount of hydrogens. Okay, that's what saturated hydrocarbons mean. That's what alkanes mean. It also means that alkanes structurally are single bonded. That means, remember when we talked about double bonds and single bonds, and we talked about bonding, okay? All alkanes are single bonded. All alkanes end in ANE. Okay, they all end in ANE. So let's talk about the first type of, okay? Now, the first type of hydrocarbon, the alkane we're going to talk about, is methane. Methane. Remember, ane, the ending, tells us that it's an alkane, tells us that it's single bonded. And what does this part tell us? Okay? This part of the word tells us how many carbons are in that hydrocarbon molecule. Now, I want to go back to, now, prefixes that have meth, and you would want to, I am going to post this slide on Google Classroom so you have it. But you could write it down right now. Meth prefix means 1 carbon. Eth means 2 carbons. Prop means 3 carbons, or prop. But means 4 carbons. Pent, like pentagon, is 5 carbons. Hex is 6 carbons. And hept is 7 carbons. We only go as far as oct, 8 carbons, okay? But let's go back to this Jamboard. So meth, as you saw, let's put this right here. Meth means it has 1 carbon. F, 2 carbons. Prop, 3 carbons. C stands for carbons. But, 4 carbons. Pent, 5 carbons. Hex, 6 carbons. So we'll just worry about those right now. So methane, ane means it's single bonded. Meth means that there's 1 carbon. So let's draw that. Okay, 1 carbon. Now, what do we know about carbon atoms? They have 4 valence electrons and they want to make 4 more bonds. So we're going to fill in the hydrogens. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. There's methane. Let's do the molecular formula for methane. How many carbons? 1. How many hydrogens? 1, 2, 3, 4. So methane is C. Oh, sorry. Let's C. Let's go back. CH4. That's methane. All single bonded. Okay? Let's go back. Let's go try another one. Let's try propane. Okay? And let's look at our chart. Prop tells us that there's 3 carbons. So let's go back. So A and E is telling us it's an alkane and they're all single bonded. Okay. Prop is telling us that there's 3 carbons, so we're going to make 3 carbons. Okay. In a row. Single bonded, right? A and E telling us it's single bonded, it's an alkane. Prop is telling us it has 3 carbons. Well, now we're going to fill in and add our hydrocarbons. Look at this. Look at this carbon right here. This carbon, we know, has 4 valence electrons. How many more bonds does it want to make? It wants to make 4 more. Well, it has 1 here. We're going to fill it in and give it 4 more bonds. So now it has 4 bonds. Let's look at this carbon. How many bonds does it have? We know it has 4 valence electrons. It wants to make 4 more bonds. It has 2 here. So how many more hydrogens do I have to put? 2 more. This carbon has 1 bond. How many more bonds does it want? It wants 3 more. So here is your structural formula for propane. What is the molecular formula, the chemical formula? How many carbons? 3. And how many hydrogens? Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There is your molecular formula for propane. Let's go back to the first slide. So we're talking about alkanes. We're talking about hydrocarbons. Okay? It's a saturated hydrocarbon. They're single bonded. They all end in A-N-E, and they're straight chained. What does that mean? That means 1 carbon after another. You notice that when we did propane, it's 1 carbon after another. So we're talking about straight chain hydrocarbons. And what that means is they're just carbons in a straight chain. Okay? Let's do another one. Let's do pentane. Pentane. Okay? Look at the ending. It's an A and E. If it ends in A-N-E, we know it's an alkane, and alkanes are all single bonded. What does Pent tell us? Let's go back. Pent tells us, prefix Pent tells us there's 5 carbons, okay? And we're talking about straight chain hydrocarbons, because that's what alkanes are. They're straight chain. So that means it's 5 carbons in a straight chain. 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Bonded together. Every carbon has 4 valence electrons, wants to form 4 more bonds, right? 4 more bonds. There's 1. How many more bonds does it need? 3. So that's going to add our 3 hydrogens. This carbon has 2. Needs 2 more to make that 4 bonds. This carbon has 2. Needs 2 more. This carbon has 2. Needs 2 more. This carbon has 1 bond. Remember, it wants to form 3 more bonds, so it needs 3. Now notice how I'm making my single bonds and being very careful how I draw it. Okay, so this is a structural formula. We call that a structural formula. Showing the structure. That's what we mean by alkanes, alkenes, alkynes. These are alkanes, right? How do we know they're alkanes? Okay, because alkanes are all single bonded. Okay, and we're filling it. Why are they called saturated? Because we're filling them up with a lot of hydrogens. Okay, let's write down the chemical formula or molecular formula for pentane. Okay, that's C. How many carbons? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And how many hydrogens? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That is the molecular, we call it molecular formula. Or sometimes we refer to it as chemical formula. Okay? So going back. All right, I am going to do an eraser because I'm going to talk about alkanes. Okay. Let me just clear this thing. Okay, so we're talking about hydrocarbons. Let's write it down. We're talking about hydrocarbons, right? We're talking about hydrocarbons have hydrogen and carbon. Am I right? Hydro, that's where you get hydrocarbon. Okay. The first type of hydrocarbons we're talking about were the alkanes, and that's what we're going to talk about today, only alkanes. And what do we know about alkanes? They're the simplest. I don't know if I mentioned that before. Simplest of hydrocarbons. Make sure you write this down in your books. You could add it to your list. They're also called saturated, right? Because what are they saturated with? They're saturated with hydrogen, right? Saturated with hydrogen. What else do we know? They end in A-N-E. Alkanes end in A-N-E. And they are straight chained. That means one carbon after another. Okay, example. All right. All right. So first type of hydrocarbons we're talking about, remember hydrocarbons are molecules that have hydrogen and carbon only in it. The first type is called alkanes. They're the simplest of hydrocarbons. They're saturated, means they have the most amount of hydrogen. And when we talk about the other type of hydrocarbons, you're going to see why this is called saturated. Alkanes end in ANE and they're straight chained. Okay? So I want you to, I'm going to go back and show you another video to help you look at this. There's our hydrocarbons. It's just in PowerPoint form. Methane has one carbon. It's the simplest. It's the major component of gas. Methane gas has 4 valence electrons, thus forms 4 covalent bonds. It wants to form 4 more bonds. There's an example with ethane. Ethane has a F. If we go back to ethane, it has 2 carbons. Okay, ethane is the another simple one. It ends in ANE. We talked about that. Okay, these are all straight chained. Names of alkanes always end in ANE. They're saturated because they contain the maximum number of hydrogen atoms, like we saw. This is all a review. Okay, this is methane. There's your 1 carbon with your 4 hydrogens, right? There's ethane, 2 carbons, and then we add our hydrogens. Okay, so what I want you to do for today is I'm going to post you some practice worksheets to practice drawing the structural formulas and the giving the chemical formulas for each of these. Okay, so today is just practicing alkanes. Monday we're going to learn about the other 2 types of straight chain hydrocarbons called alkenes and alkynes. Okay, so let's take our time doing this. All right, let me make sure there's nothing else. Okay, so I am going to post the worksheets for you to practice, okay? All right, good job, everybody.